Hi, thank you for joining us today for Revitalizing Your Grateful Patient Program with Modeling and Analytics. My name is Scott Bell. I'm with MarkeTeam based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Jeff?
My name's Jeff Johnson. I work for Inova Health System in Fairfax, Virginia.
Hi, my name is Andy Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Analytics at MarkeTeam out of Atlanta, Georgia.
So a little about Inova. We are based in Northern Virginia, just outside DC. We serve our community, and there's about 19,000 plus team members that work at Inova.
All right, just a little bit about MarkeTeam. We're a full service agency based in Atlanta. We have three main departments here. Account services that helps with strategic direction. We also do the project management for both print and digital. We have an in-house creative team as well. That's full service design. And we also have an in-house analytics team, which you're going to hear a lot about today. They help us with extensive reporting, analytics, and modeling capabilities. We have about 70 people based here in Atlanta. And just a quick overview about our client listing. We have a number of health and also other sector partners. We found that we do modeling for all of them. And a lot of what we've seen is that things that are working for a lot of our other non-hospital clients have been able to be applied to our health partners, which has really given us a nice, robust suite of different options when we approach modeling. Jeff?
So let me start off with talking about some planning. Before we were looking for an agency, I want to give a little bit more background. So back in 2017, just before I started, Inova was barely mailing any patients. So we mailed some, but not very many. And most of the patients that we mailed were based on a wealth engine type score. So somebody was very wealthy, so that's what the team mailed. What we ended up finding was we would have a real high average gift when someone responded, but sometimes we'd have a response rate of 0. Late in 2017, we started modeling the piece of the patient data that we had, and the lookalike model did really well on the first drop, and we were able to increase our volume in 2017 and then again in 2018. But the creative was starting to wane, and the team we were working with really wasn't data focused. And so we put together an RFP, and then you can see these are the 6 qualities that we were really looking for in an agency. We wanted great creative. We wanted someone that spoke, I call it hospitalese. They spoke our language. They knew what Epic was. They knew, a lot of what was going on inside hospitals. We wanted wide experience with hospitals. We wanted to, and I guess I should say my wish list item was I really wanted internal modeling, because I knew how important it was for us. And in the end, we chose MarkeTeam. So MarkeTeam started in January of 2019, and we queued up one of our first patient mailers, and we ran into multiple problems on the front end. What had happened is we went a little deeper in terms of our volume, but then we hit a couple problems. And the problems were that one of the patients that we mailed had died, but the merge purge had finished on March 1st. The patient in my example died on March 15th, and we mailed on March 29th. And the family called and said, well, our dad died there, and we made a mistake, but we didn't have a process in place to catch that person that died in between the time. We also ran into what I call chronic complainers. And these are people that would call our patient relations department on a regular basis. And so the foundation leadership said, we need to put the program on halt. We need to figure out the suppression process and come up with a solution. And so over the next 6 months, I partnered with patient relations, with risk, with our Epic department, with the foundation leadership. And our goal was to really figure out how do we create the best possible suppression process. And over those 6 months, it was a lot of back and forth, but really what really led us is that the last thing we wanted to do was to try and never send an apology letter again to a family, because we had failed that family, that the person that died. And so we really our goal was, always, okay, what are we doing that can take care of patients first? And so we put together one of the most aggressive merge purge strategies I've ever seen. In addition to a standard merge, we also now have a secondary merge that we run a deceased file 5 days before the mail piece is mailed, and we date the mail piece with the last date of the deceased, so that we really try and do the best possible job we can within talking to these people. So once we had it all done, we were able to really relaunch the program. And because we had developed these relationships, we now are going to have access to a full Epic file where we receive a new patient file each day, and we receive a new deceased file each day. And this was new and it was different. And it also gave MarkeTeam the ability to really get into a larger file and to really, help our program grow. But MarkeTeam came and they said, listen, we'd like to test a premium package, which Inova had never done. And in this case, our premium package is we're sending out a planner, a yearly planner, for a gift of $25. And that is something we hadn't done. And I went back to our leadership team and said, I know that we lose money on the front end of acquisition anyway, but here's what the long term is, that we break even in about 24 to 30 months. But we want to add an additional cost of a planner because we think it's really going to be worth it. And so we, with really smart leadership, they asked a lot of questions. I answered a lot of questions, but in the end, they gave me the thumbs up to proceed forward. And then, all of us were impacted in March 2020 when COVID hit. And we made a strategic decision to first continue to mail our patient acquisition, our model patient acquisition throughout 2020. But the key decision I think that we made is we didn't change our creative. We didn't want emergency donors. We wanted people that were going to respond, and were going to respond year after year. In both MarkeTeam's experience and my previous experience, we had both run into emergency donors. And we both knew that if we acquired emergency donors, they would disappear after a year. And so that was something that Scott and team and I all came together and said, this is the decision we're going to make, and we're going to go this way. And it's worked out great because our second gift stats on 2020 donors are actually better than 2019. And in the end, we mailed 5 times what we did in 2018. So it was a really successful year in terms of growth. And then finally, I added this slide because I thought it was really important, because I know I've heard people say, well, direct mail is expensive. And yeah, it is. But I wanted to show kind of what happens once donors come in. And so this is total giving. So right now, direct mail, there's about 40% of the revenue that comes in every year from people that we've acquired from direct mail. But the other programs that direct mail directly supports is people convert into event donors, people turn into major gifts, be it mid-level or major. And then the biggest piece of the pie is that our donors, because they develop a relationship with us, they give to plan giving. And so these are great channels, and it's really important. And that's why I wanted to add this slide, because direct mail is really worth downline revenue. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So yes, we're talking a little bit about how we actually built this data-driven approach for Inova Health Foundation here. One of the biggest things we start off with just thinking is, what data do we actually have in our current file that we can leverage? And that can be leveraged either strategically, analytically, creatively. So really what we do is we take a look back at everything as the program sits today, and then start probing and asking questions about things that we can do differently. We identified 4 different areas before we even got into the actual modeling of the program itself that we wanted to just kind of shore up. And it was the region and the service area that Inova had defined, fixing some things around the recency of visit, and using that to help leverage us mail more often. And one of the biggest things that we wanted to do, which Jeff referenced, was really doing that evaluation on that patient performance versus the outside list. In the RFP, it had stated that the outside list names were of higher value than the patients, which was atypical for us for all of our hospital clients. Then finally, just the evolution from that into some different types of creative appeals that we could do by service line. So all these things were the first steps in getting this data discovery happening, so that we could then start to build a model later on down the line. One of the first things we looked at was the marketplace. Inova had some fairly extensive internal mailing restrictions to particular zips and SCFs that were deemed to be part of their service area. When we did a full import of the patient file and took a review of where people were coming from, we saw that there were other pockets of areas outside of their defined patient service area, which is the blue area here, that light blue area here. And you can see the concentration around the belt line there, that bright red. But we were also seeing a good number of patients coming from beyond the belt line, up in the Gaithersburg area, and also on that eastern edge of West Virginia coming in. So took this to Jeff, showed him where your patients were coming from. He was able to take this to his leadership and expand their actual base of where their donors are coming from. So this allowed us to actually open up the pool of people that we could work within, the different zips that we could prospect into. So I like this one just because it's a good reminder just to ask yourself, if you have any self-imposed barriers, maybe you want to take a look at those and see what can be done to maybe help free up some new opportunities for you. Moving on to the, so we talked a little bit about the recency of patient visit. What we had seen from many of our clients was that the sooner we could get a piece of mail in front of you or an appeal in front of you from that time of your patient visit had a really big indicator on response. So all we had to do was go back and look at their file. And this was a really nice indicator here. One of the biggest things people ask me, what's one thing I could do on my file? If you're only mailing once or twice per year, you're not getting people soon enough from the recency of their patient visit. So I would say take your volume that you have for those 1 or 2 mailings and split them into 4, 5, 6, however many mailings you can get actually, and try to focus those on the more recent patient visits. This was something that we saw really pop for Inova, and it became an indicator in our model that this was a valuable piece. So really, just take a look at your own data and try to see if you have something similar on your own. So the next big thing was this conversation we had about the outside list versus patient acquisition. I stated before there was some communications that they actually used to run patients and outside lists in separate merges, and they never been run together within the same merge purge. So that was something from day one that we wanted to do. We really wanted to suss out some of this patient and outside list performance. One of the things we saw on the outside list names, though, was that they actually had some of those people had patient visits. So became this big discussion of, are they an outside list name or are they a patient name, and what actually means more to you? So we were able to take those outside list names and separate them out into the ones that were purely outside lists that had no patient visits versus the ones that had patient visits, and we could evaluate that performance. And what we saw was that the patients had a 39% higher long-term value than the pure cold outside list names. This gave us 2 pieces of information for development of a model in the future. One was certainly patient names were going to be the most important source for us, but also that the charitable aspect of these names was something that we were going to really have to focus on as well. Just because you're a patient doesn't mean that you're charitable. Just because you're charitable doesn't mean that you're a patient. So it works both ways. So those were 2 key indicators that that we had to think about as we start to develop a model for Inova here. Then Jeff also mentioned this too. Merge optimization, I won't go a lot into this, but a merge purge environment is a really unique environment where you can gain a lot of learning. You can identify a lot of different interactions. All those things can become important from a strategic perspective, from an analytic perspective, and from a creative perspective. So take a look at your merge. For the first time with Inova, we put everybody into the merge at the same time. Patients, outside lists. We also added lapse names in there as well, which allowed us to actually reclassify people from being an outside list or a patient name into a lapse donor. Place the patients in the highest priority. What we saw was that we ended up really decimating the outside list names. And they survived at less than 50% in this new environment, which pushed those list costs higher. That coupled with the LTV that we approved on the previous slide really gave us the ammunition to go to Jeff and his executive team and say, hey, we really want to move away from mailing outside list names. It's cost prohibitive. They're not as good as what we're going to get. I know it's a lot of expense up front, but just knowing all these things that they're going to be better for you long term really gave us the ammunition to really change the program fundamentally. So in 2019, patient acquisition made up about 30% of their budget. By the time that we finished 2020, excuse me, by the time we finished 2019, we actually pushed that closer to about 60% of their total volume. And then by the time we got to 2020 through today, we've only mailed 100% patient acquisition. We moved wholly away from outside list acquisition for them. And then the next evolution was really, what can we do in Merge now that we had all these things in Merge? What can we do to help build some affinity? So we actually started including the names of doctors from different service lines. So we would give our Merge house a group of doctors' names. As we got that information from the patient files, they were able to place them into different streams where they could get a specialized appeal, either on cancer, heart, neuro, or if they didn't fit one of those doctors, they were falling into the generic. The vast majority of people still receive the generic appeal, but for those that we knew that had some sort of affinity to a particular service line, we really want to make sure that we could give them a specialized message. So we gave them a different letter. It was signed by a different signer, often by the head of the department. And what we saw was that they're actually adding some lift to the average gift, and that LTV is starting to grow too. So again, these are all things you can look at in your own file just to try and get a sense of things that you might be able to use in the future in a model development. So I'll pass it off to Andy now to talk a bit more about how that actual model came to fruition.
Thanks, Scott. Next, we're going to go over how we utilize modeling to really unlock the value of those patient lists. Fundamentally, a predictive model is when you take historical information and identify correlations within that data to predict future behaviors and outcomes. Typically, you would use some type of algorithm to formulate that prediction. There are numerous ones out there to choose from, and they can really range in complexity. So here's a few examples of the types of algorithms we may consider when we approach a fundraising model where we're looking to predict donation behavior. Some of the basic algorithms include segmentation models, where you're essentially using a decision tree technique to assign values to various qualifying attributes of a constituent. And there are also engagement or lead scores, which several CRMs have built-in capabilities for. This is where you may assign a custom weight to specific characteristics of a donor in that system, and it calculates in real time for each constituent for use, more broader use across your program. The statistical model is a little bit more advanced, typically require additional software and expertise to develop. Many of you have probably familiar with or heard of regression models, but there are also classification models like discriminant analysis or ensemble models where you're combining several different modeling and machine learning algorithms into a single model. The type of algorithm selected would really be based on the behavior you're looking to predict. So for example, maybe you need to know the likelihood of a donation at a certain giving level versus just the fact that they either gave a donation or the value of that specific donation. Okay. So before any analysis and modeling is performed, it's really important to understand your audience and the behavior you're looking to predict. You can start by thinking about your universe in these three key audiences. First, you have your eligible universe of constituents. In this context, with a patient model, we're thinking about the entire eligible patient universe after deceased, suppression, and underage constituents are removed. Next, we may further narrow that audience based on some historical analysis or insights from industry trends that we've seen for other clients in our case. In this case, we were able to, in this case, where we're building the model to acquire donors, we found that younger patients were not close to performing at an acceptable level, even when we would be able to do additional modeling. So we only considered patients that were 45 or older. Lastly, is that target population is of people taking that desired action. And in this case, those are those patients making a donation and responding with a gift. Okay, with the audiences defined, we started analyzing various segments of the file based on predictive indicators for concentrations of donors within those segments. This included segmentation across both the patient visit history we had access to, but also external data overlays. The overlays included that we have access to have over 1,000 different data elements across demographic, lifestyle, psychographic, and online behavior. There's a few examples listed on this slide, but what we're really also able to evaluate across is charitable indicators, since Inova participates in a donor co-op. This does require sharing the donor file, but there are no patients shared that don't have a prior donation, and there is no indication on that information that is shared distinguishing who has been a patient to Inova. So you can go ahead and evaluate these segments against prior history, which is what we did. But if you don't have any history available, if you're just starting this program, you can test campaigns to a segmented sample of your patients. So you can easily evaluate the performance across those segments and advise those future mailing efforts. So here's some of the results from our analysis across the segments based on the patient information and visit history. Here we're specifically looking at response rates and how they indexed against the overall average. The variable that indexed the highest with over 150% increase in response was the segment of patients with a specialty visit. So this can include a visit associated with oncology, vascular, neurology, or something of that nature. Patients with 5 or more visits in the last year had a 50% higher response. There was a similar lift in response observed for patients with a recent visit in the last 3 months, as well as patients that were 70 or older. Lastly, we found that visitors to specific hospitals also had a significantly higher response than the average patient universe. Okay. This next view shows the top predictive indicators across the external data, where we can considered a narrowed list of about 750 different variables. Like we see in many of our models, we found that the charitable indicators were highly predictive. Specifically, donors giving to veterans or human services, they had about a 75% or more higher response than the overall average. The veteran indicator was not surprising since Inova does operate in the DC area where people may have a closer affiliation with veterans organizations. We also found donors giving to 3 or more causes have a 66% higher response. And the last 2 indicators for people with a second home or those having their mortgage paid off did not have much of a lift in response, but they did have a much higher average gift. So people with a second home had a 90% higher average gift, and people with their mortgage paid off also had a 50% higher average gift. Okay, so in order to put these insights into action, the final step is really to build that model, build and evaluate that model. Again, you can take a basic approach if you're not familiar with some of those advanced techniques and build a point-based scoring algorithm, or select specific segments that we just identified that have higher response rates or average gifts. For Inova, we use the regression model, which has several advantages compared to other approaches. The score we were able to produce was not just based on the likelihood of a donation, but it also factors in the value of that donation as well, and also the value of that donor, prospective donor. This we know from prior analysis is not only key to acquiring donors that will give initially at a higher level, but also it translates into that higher long-term value. This approach allowed us to apply a granular score to each of the campaigns, which can be very useful when we need to make finer adjustments to the size, or we want to fine-tune the performance of the overall audience. Okay. After introducing that model in 2019 for those direct mail acquisition campaigns, we closely monitor the results to verify the effectiveness of the model. Here we combine the results of the campaigns for the first year, where we were mailing every 60 to 90 days, and we evaluated the return on investment for each model decile. And for those of you not familiar with deciles, it's really just a 10% slice of the file ranked by their model score, where the first decile is the patients with the highest rank or predictive value, and 10 are the people with the lowest predictive value. As you can see, the model was very effective at predicting higher performing patients. Not only did that first decile generate positive net revenue initially, but it really does a good job of identifying those lower performing deciles at the bottom where we were cutting off our selections for each of the mailings. So our threshold for ROI is typically around a 0.4. So anything lower than that typically takes more than 2 to 3 years for the donors to generate enough revenue to recoup that initial investment. So we ended up cutting those last 2 deciles. And this is about where we were expecting when we were initially rolling this out. Because when we introduce a new model, we prefer to test the depth of the file. So we have actual data to inform those select decisions down the road. The use of the model, along with those other enhancements that Scott and Jeff alluded to, really had a huge impact, almost doubling the ROI for patients compared to outside lists. Scott mentioned earlier, we ended up transitioning to only mailing the patient list and acquisition. The increased ROI was really driven by the lower list costs and 85% higher response rate for that list. Not only did the upfront performance improve, but the long-term value of those model patients increased by about 50% compared to where they were prior to the introduction of the model. Okay. We were also able to leverage this model in patient acquisition emails to address some concerns we were having with low engagement and higher opt-out rates for those appeals. We applied this model along with our online propensity model to segment the top list for an initial email send. And then once we confirmed a higher performance for that segment, we were able to deploy to an expanded audience shortly after that of the lower scoring names. This approach proved to be very successful in reducing the number of opt-outs and increasing the engagement and overall giving for these campaigns while sending to a smaller list. Once those donors have been acquired, the overall goal is really to grow their value over time. We're looking to achieve this through improved retention and also promoting engagement across multiple channels with that increased channel integration. As Jeff alluded to earlier, ultimately, we want these donors to move up the donor pyramid and grow those major donor and plan giving programs and upgrade to those programs as well. Modeling can also be effective in supporting these efforts in addition. All right, for the mid-level program, we built a model to identify existing donors that have a high likelihood to upgrade their giving to the mid-level program, which in this case was $1,000 or more. Initially, we profiled the current mid-level donors compared to the existing donors and patient prospects and made some observations. So here's a summary of the indicators that really differentiated the mid-level audience to those other audiences. As you would expect, those wealth indicators for income and net wealth seem to be predictive, but it's really the combination of those willingness factors that was also extremely important. As we often find with these more committed donors, they tend to support fewer charities, but they really concentrate their giving and give larger amounts. So we weren't too concerned when we saw that a lower percentage for that compared to their donors. There were also other behavioral factors that we found predictive, including higher education, online activity, and even vitamin purchase behavior. And again, you don't need to build a full model to really leverage these insights. If you have some of these wealth and other factors appended to your file, you can certainly use that decision tree approach here. So for example, you may select, all of the donors giving, in the level before your mid-level cutoff. So in this case, maybe it's $500 to $999. And then you could mine the lower levels with these other factors you may have available to you. Maybe select active donors with a $100 gift, but also have a wealth of $750,000 or more. And then you can go through and just utilize all the data that you have. Here's the invite package that we actually sent to the modeled audience. And we also used it as a renewal for the existing mid-level donors. As you can see, this is a high-touch, very nice invite appeal for the branded mid-level program that's branded as Visionaries. There's a 2-page letter with this neat gatefolded brochure that includes details about the different benefits you'll receive at those different giving levels. There's also a full-page reply device that includes an ask with each of the different visionary level thresholds listed, so that you can easily check off the different membership types you would like to give and reply with your gift. And finally, here's a summary of some predictive indicators that we typically see for plan giving donors, and whether those indicators have a positive or negative influence on the likelihood of the donor deciding to make a planned gift. Age is obviously much older at the time of a planned gift takes place. Hopefully it's much older for all of us. But if you are modeling for appeals asking them to include your organization in their will, it may only be slightly older than the average donor you have on file. So maybe it's somewhere between 55 and 70 when they're doing their estate planning. They tend to have a long history of giving many gifts, but their giving may actually decelerate as they get older and are maybe living on a more fixed income, or after they have added your organization to their estate plans. Patient activity is also predictive, similar to what we saw with the patient model. So that's relevant here. Also, we sometimes find that the sustainers tend to be less likely to make a planned gift. These donors tend to be younger, and that may be a corollary factor driving that. But that may change in the future as sustainers, become older. When considering third-party data, the wealth and charitable giving indicators have a high influence, as you might expect. Again, these donors typically concentrate their giving to fewer organizations, similar to what we saw with the mid-level donor model. And also, we can easily adjust this model for the different plan giving vehicles. Okay, so next, Scott is going to share an omni-channel campaign, which was really a culmination of the modeling, creative, and strategy, and all of that coming together.
Thanks, Andy. Yep. So really, it's where do we go from here, right? And my goal is, all of our goals are actually to, how can we continue to leverage data, analytics, evaluating that data, and how does that feed into our strategy and our creative? So immediately, we are going to continue to model and expand those patients, those lapsed donors. We're always looking at testing different types of creative to them. But really, as we go through that, we're really just kind of going this continuous loop here, feeding everything back into this machine and seeing what we learn and how can we affect things for the future. One of the biggest things we have right now is really trying to leverage a multi-channel campaign. Something new that was awarded to MarkeTeam over the last year was the digital program. And that's something that we think has a lot of opportunities to drive upgrades. A couple of some of the things that Andy spoke about with the online affinity models that we have, and overlapping that with the creative that we have in the mail to really give a good dedicated multi-channel experience. Andy had also spoke about some of the other ways to give that we're looking at. Those include pledge, peer-to-peer fundraising. Nova's done a great job in building out that component on their site. So that's something we are looking forward to, who those people look like, who can we source for those appeals that are either cold acquisition or maybe people that already exist in our file. And like all of us are always focused on donor advised funds and how can we get more of those people out of the woodwork. But throughout all this, as this file composition changes, we're going to continue to look at our models, continue to run the back verify, continue to monitor that long-term value to make sure that everything that we're going in this direction is the right thing for Inova, both short and long-term, to really optimize their investment. Just a campaign I want to share with you. This is a new campaign for us this year around Doctors Day. It's something that Inova wanted to honor their doctors with a multi-channel campaign around Doctors Day on March 30th. So we designed a custom logo and conceptualized this brand new campaign for them that was deployed across multiple channels, including direct mail, 2 emails to Inova's house file, 1 email to the model patients, paid Facebook lead acquisition, and organic social media posts. and dedicated landing pages. So in total, though, the campaign generated more than 1,200 messages of support to the Inova doctors, in addition to thousands of dollars of revenue. First off, we started with this auto direct mail campaign that featured that custom Doctor's Day logo throughout. The letter came from a different writer than our normal one, Inova's head doctor of clinical enterprise. He introduced the campaign. He asked centers to join in the sentiment by sending a message of thanks to a doctor and also making a supporting gift. And you'll see that we executed that on the reply device. It has a double reply device. The top half served as the mail-in reply, while the bottom half was actually where you write in your thank you note. So to help drive that engagement, we asked those recipients to write their message of thanks to a doctor. There was a dedicated URL they could go out to and a dedicated landing page they could go out to help generate these multi-channel conversions. And all the logo is carried on to everything throughout the campaign to really help with those conversions. So it was on the reply envelope. And we timed this so that the package would arrive in home at the same time that our digital assets were being launched. So really what that did was it created this nice consistent messaging blitz across multiple channels across Inova. So thinking about the timing, thinking about the audiences that are going to see this, and thinking about having a consistent message across all those different channels is really important to us. People really talk a lot about the donor experience and things like that. You can't manage how a donor is going to interact with your organization, but you can control the messages that they'll see. So that's one thing that we always try to keep in mind. From there, we did deploy to patient emails. We actually did model that patient email list of prime prospects using that internet propensity overlay on top of that. And that performed really well for us across all measures of success. We're always concerned about opt-out rates, things like that. It was all within our normal metrics of opt-out rates. So that model file was really helpful in helping us get there. Didn't have a lot of opt-outs. And overall, that generated more than 900 messages of support and thousands of dollars of revenue from our patient email file. The house file email, it was a two-part email series. One was a teaser announcement sent a week in advance of Doctor's Day, and then a celebratory email on Doctor's Day. Similar metrics here: strong open and click-through rates, low unsubscribes, positive revenue figures, and what was traditionally a pretty weak time of year for them. So we're really pleased by the performance of all that. The campaign also featured 2 organic sets of social posts. They were served across Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. We had over 13,000 impressions from those. They were engaged with hundreds of times. Those also helped to generate new notes of thanks, new subscribers, and revenue. And one of the key aspects of the emails is this daisy chain engagement that we had. So you'll see over there on the right-hand side of the slide. Basically, what we did was that we asked them to send a note of thanks to their doctor. So it landed them on this page, this thank you note page. Once they did that, they were able to fill out their name and then share a message of thanks. From there, they were landed on a confirmation page. Thank you for sending a message of support in honors of Doctor's Day, and then ask them to please consider donating to help Inova doctors. This was great for lead gen. It allowed us to break into new audiences and also allowed us to break into our patient file, where we had a lot of success with this. Kind of a gentle entry into a group without a hard ass right off the bat. But really pleased with all this, making sure that the messages were kept consistent, the imagery was the same so that we could drive those conversions and everything else. So this is the culmination of modeling, creative, and strategy all coming together to really have a nice, optimized, integrated campaign for Inova. So great. So thank you all for your time today. Please don't forget to rate the session in the conference mobile app, and we'll open up to the floor for questions.